Kirby here. I am cripple, cranky, and caffeinated, and that is a run-on sentence. I hope I didn't steal that from YouTube, or I really don't know yet. But anyway, here is kind of an article that I want to go through on ABC News because I think they've got one of the better framings I've seen of a mainstream outlet about this. I'm sure it's already flooded your social media respective timelines because a lot of times anti-trans rallying cries are a way for bigots along with other people with different political motivations to be able to get their rhetoric across. So kind of just the outline for this video, I'm going to be going through this article, which I have not read all the way through, full disclosure, before recording this video. A better journalist than I would have already done so. But, so we're going to be going through this particular article, and then after that, I kind of just want to give my own takes on kind of transgender people in sports. Because there's a couple things I think in this debate, which I'm not debating trans people's existence in any kind of space necessarily, but I will give you kind of my lay down when it comes to trans women being in women's sports, because that's the intersection I have, the one that I understand, and the one that could use more color, I think, afterward. But we're going to start with that story, use that as an example of the fear mongering that tends to take place, and then I'll broaden it out to kind of a few points that I think need to be highlighted when it comes to trans women in women's sports, because people don't talk about the thing I'm going to talk about enough, as well as another point that is important to emphasize. Anyway, and this is per ABC News. This is an article from someone named Leah Sarnoff. And to start, USA fencing disqualifies athlete for refusing to compete against transgender woman. So what it's saying here is the sporting organization of US fencing disqualified an athlete because they refused to compete against a transgender woman. This is an entirely different article, but apparently, we have been banned from all women's sports per a Trump executive order. Lovely. Gotta love those very, very totally grassroots executive orders, right? Anyway, quote, a female fencer was disqualified from a competition for refusing to compete against a transgender opponent, USA Fencing said in a statement to ABC News on Thursday. Quote, continuing the quote, the incident occurred last month at a USA Fencing sanctioned regional tournament when fencer Stephanie Turner, again, their name is Stephanie Turner, decided to remove her mask and take a knee instead of competing against Redmond Sullivan, a transgender woman. So the person who refused to be a part of the event is somebody by the name of Stephanie Turner, and the transgender woman, who I'm not going to give a lot of attention here, is Redmond Sullivan, because this woman's done nothing wrong. They are just trying to compete in fencing, which I've read, maybe not here but in a different place, that fencing is pretty gender. The gender doesn't matter as much in traditional competitions. It's not as much of a focus on whether or not they're male, female, etc. But I could be wrong on that. I don't know. To continue with the article here, quote, following the act of protest, the referee of the University of Maryland match, which was not an NCAA tournament, issued a black card to Turner, removing her from the competition. Quote, USA Fencing's current transgender and non-binary athlete policy was enacted in 2013 and allows athletes to participate in sanctioned events and, quote, in a manner consistent with their gender ideology expression, regardless of the gender associated with the sex they were assigned at birth, meaning that if they are somebody who identifies as a woman, they compete against the women, and if they identify as a man, they compete with the men. Moving on. I'm going to read this whole article here. Quote, USA Fencing told ABC News on Thursday that the decision to disqualify Turner from the tournament was, quote, not related to any personal statement, end quote, but because she refused to fence an, quote, eligible opponent, end quote. So what USA Fencing is saying that she is disqualified not because of any kind of statement that Turner has made that would be prejudiced against trans women at all. It's saying that she was disqualified because she just refused to play in a match. To widen this out, if somebody, what would be a good equivalent? If there was a player who was playing on a baseball team who was refusing to play against a team, so let's just say it's the Ontario Orioles, I think is what they're called. Why did I pick that one? Or wherever they're from. My bad, that's probably wrong. Let's just say the New York Yankees and the Red Sox are playing in a baseball game, and the right fielder is refusing to play. They are kneeling while a game is about to happen. They are going to remove that right fielder and put in somebody who is going to play. They were refusing to play in their event, which means it's going to disqualify them from being able to be the right fielder in that game because they were refusing to play. And I don't really have an example of why, but just to kind of zone out here, I guess the best comparison probably would be tennis, actually. So let's try this analogy one more time. Let's say a tennis player is refusing to play in a tennis match against somebody for them wearing a pair of red socks. That person is going to be disqualified from at least the match, maybe the competition, because they're refusing to play. And that's kind of the important thing here, is that there's an eligible opponent, and in this tennis analogy, they're an eligible opponent and they're refusing to play. What else do you do besides disqualify them? They are removing themselves as eligible to be playing in this tournament. And, quote, to continue this article here, but that's kind of the comparison I want to use. Sullivan transferred to the Wagner College women's fencing team from the men's team in 2024. Quote, we understand that the conversation on equality and inclusion pertaining to transgender participants in sports is evolving, USA Fencing said in a statement, adding that the organization, quote, will always err on the side of inclusion, and we're committed to amending the policy as more relevant evidence-based research emerges and as policy changes to take effect in the wider Olympic and Paralympic movement, end quote. In a statement to ABC News on Thursday, Turner detailed the moment she took a knee and decided not to compete against Sullivan. Okay, so these are the words of Turner here, who was the one that refused to play against a transgender woman who, in the eyes of USA Fencing, is an eligible opponent. This video is kind of becoming a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be, so I'm going to finish covering this article and then probably give a quick primer on the points that I think get missed in this discussion, and then probably make any kind of broader points about trans women in sports in a separate video, maybe, but I still at least want to put them in this video. To continue again, this is Turner. I read further ahead. Why'd I do that? Quote, as a woman fencing in a women's tournament, again, I've read that in a women's tournament, I do not believe men should fence in my category. Again, this is Turner. Their beliefs are that this other person, Sullivan, oh wow, they misgender them later on in this, but just be prepared for that. That they don't think that they are a woman on the usual grounds of them not of some baby's understanding of biology. But to continue, I do not believe men should fence in my category. I was not aware Mrs. Sullivan, I'm not misgendering this person, they didn't do anything wrong, was registered until the night before the tournament. I prayed about it and decided that if Mrs. Sullivan, again I'm not misgendering them, and I were to fence face to face, that I would peacefully protest by taking a knee, Turner said, misgendering Sullivan. Again, the important part here, misgendering Sullivan. An official USA fencing policy since 2024 has been that how they identify is how if they identify as a woman, they play as a woman. And I don't know how much longer Sullivan's been fencing as a woman. I don't think that really matters. But Turner, quote, Turner said she previously refused defense in tournaments in which she knew a transgender athlete was going to compete, including the 2023 Summer Nationals. On a quick note about that too, there aren't that many if we're talking about in the scheme of all sports here, there aren't that many transgender athletes. That's why when you see news articles about it, like one of the last ones had to do with somebody in a swimming meet, there aren't that many transgender athletes. This is kind of a broader point I wanted to talk about, but I kind of just want to get this out. There aren't that many trans women competing competing alongside cis women in sports. We are kind of a drop in a bucket in terms of like the amount of competitors, and usually if you look at the actual results of the match, they didn't have they don't win. These transgender athletes don't win. I have not seen a story where they are winning these events by a wider margin. That just doesn't happen. So not only does it seem to be that they are kind of a drop in the bucket, not that many trans women athletes in sports to begin with, they aren't winning these competitions. What's with the outrage? Again, this is per USA fencing policy that Miss Sullivan's able to participate as a woman. That's not me. That's USA fencing. This is silly. And the 2023 Summer Nationals. Well, that's good for her. Also, apparently Turner thanks God. Yeah, because God has nothing to do with your bigotry towards trans women, Turner. That's your choice. That's not God's. Stop with the smokescreen. I'm skipping that part. This mission to fight for female exclusive sports and putting me in a place to effectively protest, Turner added. You're thanking God for an act of bigotry? That's crazy. God doesn't care? That's okay. And here we go. To finish out the article here, quote, ABC News has reached out to Redmond Sullivan for a comment. The University of Maryland declined to comment on the incident. Quote, the incident between Turner and Sullivan comes amid a wider debate surrounding transgender athletes and women's and girls' sports. In February, Donald Trump signed an executive order banning transgender athletes from participating in women's sports, fulfilling a promise that was at the center of his 2023 campaign. This goes on to talk more about the executive order and more fear-mongering amongst women in locker rooms, which is stupid. This has to do with more of the order. This isn't really relevant to what I'm talking about. Let's see, there's more here. Proponents say, however, Trump's federal directions brings clarity at the federal level. I don't think that's true. We're National Guard and bothering. We follow federal law. NCAA. That's a great statement. I can cover that in a separate video. But anyway, that's kind of what I want to talk about. This is kind of more of a jumping off point here. So, this person was under USA fencing guidelines at the very least, not under federal guidelines. To say that Trump's executive order is federal law, I mean, probably in the technical sense, but this idea that it hasn't gone through Congress, it hasn't been officially codified. But the person was a trans woman that was participating in fencing. Let me see if I can find something on typical fencing gender stuff real quick. Hold on. Typical gender, let's just call it, what would the word be? Decorum? Fencing. It's probably going to give me just a bunch of stuff. Again, this is portrait for a second. I just want to see if I can find the thing that I read, because I thought I read. Nice. Hold on. So that's the official policy. And then... No. That's not. Okay. Wow. This isn't. What did I see? I don't know what I saw, but actually, let's look at that again. Let's look at the. I'll make a separate video, I think, outlining the USA fencing's stuff. I think it's kind of important, and then I'll go over kind of the broader points. So the last thing I kind of wanted to add before this video wraps up, there aren't that many trans women participating in women's sports. That's such a very small percentage of people, and even as there are more and more trans women participating in sports, if it is a minor and this trans woman is on puberty blockers, they haven't even gone through puberty fully yet. So this idea that there's a biological difference between minors participating in sports is farcical. And again, there aren't that many, even in like past puberty. There aren't that many trans women in women's sports. That's why it's in swimming or in fencing and these sports that don't really get a lot of press otherwise. Well, they get press, but what I mean is, like, in terms of like what the average American sports viewer is seeing, it's not fencing and it's not swimming. I could be wrong about that. I'm not saying that it's not popular and people don't like it. I'm just saying that out of the typical American sports, swimming and fencing are not one that typical American would say that they regularly enjoy. That being said, did you know that once a trans woman is on HRT for, I think it's a year, maybe 2 years, the actual the difference between the cis woman and the trans woman is pretty negligible in terms of like physical strength. It's very similar. It gets to a certain point where their levels are actually about the same as a cis woman's. People don't talk about that enough. Not to mention, we accept there to be biological differences between cis women when it comes to different sports, height, weight, length of arm, etc. Name any kind of physical difference. Why would all of a sudden this potential physical difference, which if they're on hormones long enough there is less of a physical difference, mean that they cannot compete in women's sports? Like, for example, Michael Phelps' body is basically built perfectly to be a swimmer. There is a biological difference between Michael Phelps and insert Olympic swimmer here. Then the challenge would be for the ones that want to make an argument against trans people in sports is, can you name me the qualifying physical difference between Michael Phelps, insert men's swimmer here, that is a gulf that is, and then compare, say, that same swimmer with a trans man swimmer, or however you want to do it. Could you explain to me how the physical difference between Michael Phelps and this cis man swimmer is of any, is that difference a meaningful difference between these three? I mean, there are plenty of athletes that between the differences between cis people, between people who are not trans, that could mean a wider gulf than somebody who is trans. Logically, that doesn't really follow, and if they want to make that case, they have to make the case that that difference is a meaningful difference. And I haven't seen it. Their arguments and points aren't exactly sophisticated, but I kind of just wanted to give so this is kind of an example of what I'm talking about, where the fear-mongering is, we find a recent piece of news that has a trans person in it, usually a trans woman, and then we fear-monger about how there shouldn't be quote men in women's sports, end quote, which I'm not touching that, but that's usually the fear-mongering. That's the frame. When you look deeper into it, you see that they don't normally place super high. I don't think that when the swimming case, that the trans person didn't go on to win. I don't know what Miss Sullivan went on to do in the fencing tournament. I don't think she won. So there's lots of nuances here. Don't really buy into the fear-mongering. Have a differing opinion on trans people in sports, trans women in sports, if you want. Just keep in mind that these things that people talk about aren't always as much of a meaningful difference as they want to claim that they are. And USA Fencing stated they wanted to wait for more evidence on that sort of thing. So, in the case of fencing, I would side with USA Fencing in the sense of they're going to let people compete with how they identify, and they're waiting on more information, and they would rather side on the side of inclusion. Again, have a differing opinion on that if you want. I just want to get my opinions and my takes out there as possible, and this is kind of just the latest example that you kind of see that people who are against trans people will latch onto to say, oh, well, this is why we shouldn't have, etc. Why we shouldn't have trans people in sports. They almost never talk about trans men in those situations because it wouldn't help their argument, because from their logic of a trans woman having more physical strength, a trans man would have less physical strength competing in men's sports. That's why they don't ever bring that up. It would weaken their argument, which the argument's terrible to begin with, as I think I kind of laid out. But anyway, those are my takes on the current story going around about the fencer who basically decided not to compete and was disqualified because she didn't want to compete. Didn't really have much to do with the actual opponent, besides the fact that that was Turner's stated reason, which, okay. Would Turner be able to describe the actual difference in that particular athlete between other cis women and articulate why she wouldn't compete with them with any actual evidence? I would suspect not. I don't know. Thank you for staying along for this a little bit longer video, and I know I've been sitting here with my phone screen for too long, so I'll probably insert some footage from somewhere for that. And trans women are valid. If you want to be in women's sports and you're a trans woman, I support you. Best of luck. I will see everybody in the next video, and trans rights forever. Bye.